Last but not least, in this series, I'll cover the most overtly authoritarian rhetorical strategies to manufacture silence about third-party voting and consent about voting for Democrats.
Welcome to Deconstructing Necroliberalism.
Let's start with the common trope to coerce you to vote for them. A vote for a third party is a vote for Trump, which is false. It simply doesn't follow from voting for the Greens that you are really voting for Trump. That's a blatant lie. Hence, you are not responsible for him. Similarly, it's your moral obligation to vote for 100% Hitler over 101% Hitler. Or we genocide anyway, so we might as well just keep our own grocery prices down. In reality, we mustn't think in numbers, which are unverified anyways and usually exclude slow murder, systemically caused death due to environmental damages, harsh working conditions, and so on. And we also mustn't think in immediate and direct outcomes, but in long-term and systemic dynamics. But now let's move to the promised, more obviously authoritarian tactics like silencing. I'm speaking. Unless you want Trump, just shut up. There's genocide, get over it. And I've really read that. You're Palestinian or German, and then either it's not your business how we vote, although your life, due to US imperialism, depends on it way more than the speaker's one. Or supposedly, more nicely, you don't know US politics, you dumb-ass, shut up. Or the same hegemonic paternalism masks more friendly. That just doesn't work in a two-party system, which is, by the way, a misleading framing. It's not a two-party system. It's a winner-takes-it-all system. But it's renamed to make you feel coerced to vote for a major party. Silencing always functions as policing, but policing can also explicitly judge you. It's immoral to not vote for my party. You've probably noticed the victim blaming and shifting of responsibility here. And then there's something like the perfect victim demand. Not only are you, as a voter, at best allowed to vote third party only if you either live in a deep blue state like California, where you cannot be a real threat to the system and only cast a so-called or so relabeled protest vote, so that you are a perfect or perfectly peaceful and non-disturbing protester, or if you are a Palestinian American who has lost their parents to genocide. Actually, I've never even seen this kind of real concession. Just picture the Overton window as a spectrum of 20,000 possible ways of structuring society. 20,000 because that's the estimated number of cultures before colonialism eradicated the most of them and assimilated nearly all of the rest. As ours is obviously the most brutal one, you should picture us at being at point 20,000 and 90,999 steps to the far right. Republicans and Democrats, while sustainably and peacefully living cultures are at number 1. And this is practically the position a third party is expected to hold, which is literally impossible to be so different from your own culture. But on top of that, third parties are not only expected to reach the impossible within, or rather outside, the limited frameworks of the global north, at the same time they are expected to fit our norms, to be electable. But the other is always expected to be perfect as a precondition to be worthy listening to. That leads us to, euphemistically speaking, double standards. Because while the other always has to be flawless, we always find excuses for members of our in-groups. While Democrats pretend to want to save democracy, which in reality is the opposite in oligarchy, they use lawfare, costly but unwinnable lawsuits to get the Greens off the ballot. More generally speaking, while they at number 90,999 falsely claim to be the opposite of number 20,000 of colonial fascism and excuse their own colonial fascism, they always fearmonger about the Republicans' colonial fascism. Or when I remind liberals that their dams didn't codify Roe v. Wade and aren't generally pro-choice, they go like, just elect more dams. Huh? That doesn't make any sense at all. You should actually vote for a party whose members are all and consistently anti-authoritarian and anti-sexist. It also doesn't make sense when it's reformulated as, that was Joey Manchin. He's not a real Democrat. Although the Democrat establishment has supported him over progressive challenges. Just vote for a real Democrat next time. A real Democrat the DNC will run a conservative against with millions of money. And have you noticed how the goalposts were moved in this typical conversation in order to keep the Democrats pure and innocent away from their responsibility? When Democrats single out Donald Trump as uniquely evil, while it's the Democrats who work with most evil Republicans like Dick Cheney that's also moving the goalpost, when they constantly, every 4 years, apply this practice of hyper-focusing solely on that artificially singularized Republican who is currently running for president, that allows Democrats to join forces with this allegedly uniquely evil candidate as soon as another Republican is running. Hence, they are, so to say, constantly moving the goalpost of what is evil to the right, constantly exonerating ever more evil. This rhetorical technique can also be observed in our general discourse. First, we were asked to name our arguments against Democrats, and then, after these arguments were convincing due to their commitment to genocide, it was demanded more from us. Genocide is not a red line anymore. The goalposts are moved. Explain how Jill Stein is better when she's on Putin's side. She isn't. Okay, then tell me, where have the Greens ever achieved something? Apart from introducing people to a more social worldview, or a segment of our otherwise extremely narrow Overton window, look at the 130 seats they've gained on the local level. Okay, that's good, but explain how your vote for Stein will end the genocide. A demand, by the way, never imposed on the speaker themselves, because the goalposts and bars are moved. And again, that's falsely equating not systemically emboldening politicians to commit genocide to direct and perfectly positive effects of voting. And please pay attention to how this debate strategy is practically trying to authoritarianly dictate to you how and what to answer. Explain, explain, explain. Everything perfectly and directly understandable for me, who has never listened and understood anything and doesn't listen anyways. It's a different kind of moving goalpost, but nevertheless the same practice when ever more demands on third parties are created, like ever rising barriers to get on the ballot or on the debate stage. As a marginalized person or group, you'll always have to chase the ever-moving goalpost of the privileged, and you'll never reach them. You'll never satisfy them. You'll never be peaceful and perfect enough to be worthy to be listened to. The other dismissive authoritarian way to never let marginalized people and opponents reach their privileged oppressors are killer phrases, which kill every discussion immediately in order to quell upcoming cognitive dissonances when the marginalized person's argument was actually quite convincing. From voting third party just doesn't work and a vote for Jill Stein won't end the genocide either to you are a butt. There are hundreds of variants to make it very clear that the speaker is under no circumstances ready to engage with you in a factual discussion and consider your arguments. They don't want to have their fictitious fairy tale world disturbed. And yes, I've really been called a bot on Twitter more than once. This dehumanization, which turns me into an object, literally into a nobody, and I'll make a whole episode about the colonial fascist practice of nobodying, from the terra nullius to the res nullius claim another time, functions as justification for not listening to me, my body's needs, and my arguments. I mean, it's totally irrational. You can literally look into my profile, my real name, and a profile picture, and see that I'm a former local council member. It's easily researchable that I'm real, but that is, as I said, not the point of such thought-terminating phrases. A little bit more concealed is the strategy of avoiding to engage with your convincing argument in dialogues like the following. Does the Democratic Party actually do what they promise? Unlike Trump, they at least hear you and promise to do everything in their power to fulfill your wishes. Well, that's missing the point. The Democrats are guilty of making false promises completely and falsely exonerating them. Cherry picking is another form of avoiding strong arguments on the other side. Here your opponent will pick on a weaker argument made instead. They might even try to avoid to engage with your stronger argument using the famous strawman technique, where they, instead of countering any of your arguments, will refute a point you haven't even made, which is similar but different to the moving of goalposts. Here it is the attention which is shifted away from your strongest argument, not a bar you have to reach to be listened to, which is constantly raised. Consequently, when you fall for the shift of attention to a weaker point on your side, you're attacking the strawman instead of a real counter-argument, which then conceals the strength of your original argument. One way liberals substitute is third-party voters' actual position or argument with a distorted, misrepresented, reductionist, or exaggerated version of your position is claiming you are helping or even favoring Trump. Just say it. A blatant lie and killer phrase. Another way to redirect the discussion to another issue to which the person doing the redirection can better respond is the red herring. Again, the function is to divert our attention and to abandon the strong original argument. Genocide? Yes, but what about trans people under Trump? Democrats do evil? Look at Trump. Why do you never criticize Republicans? Because they don't pretend to be leftist. Sometimes such distraction attempts lead to complete derailings when, instead of arguing ad res on the issue, people argue ad victoriam, for victory only, supposedly proving their own power rather than proving to have a powerful factual argument. Usually it's getting really emotional. Killer phrases will be followed by an escalation of emotive language, adding ever more and ever more intense emotive language, intensifying dismissiveness, judgments, smears, and more or less overt insults. In short, it's getting really irrational, just to dominate you, silence you and the discussion, and abandon your arguments. You're not telling me, a black woman, that I'm doing the bidding of white supremacism. You're mispronouncing Harris's name. That shows that you are a fascist. Yeah, that was said. Another way of distracting from strong arguments is a related practice, the gish gallop, a rhetorical technique in which a person attempts to overwhelm or drown you in a flood of fake arguments, using a wild mix of inaccurate statements halved with distortions and lies, with a rapidity that makes it impossible for you to address them in the time or space available. It's quantity over quality. And it basically exploits that the deconstruction of 3 gish gallop sentences would use 10 minutes. In other words, it's like throwing as much shit at the wall as possible, knowing that most of it will stick. While the last 2 authoritarian rhetorical strategies are openly hostile, a similarly annoying tactic is sea lioning. Similar to moving the goalpost, this trolling practice also pursues people with relentless requests. This time, however, you are seemingly politely asked to deliver evidence for premises you only implied. Hence again, this is distracting from your strong main point. Often these supposedly unfounded claims, supposedly in need of reliable sources, are premises which have in reality been thoroughly studied within non-mainstream ideological research at least, and are merely in contradiction to our Necroliberal belief system. In other words, it's about fundamentally different worldviews which can never be explained on Twitter. Yet you are once again asked to do the impossible under the pretense of a sincere interest in an honest debate about why do you view our system and our system's parties as systemically evil. When you either ignore these requests or cannot link to a single academic paper which explains everything, or react angry, then you'll be smeared as an emotional and irrational authoritarian who doesn't have any interest in a civilized democratic debate, but only has weak arguments. A reversal of victim and offender again. With the effect that you are viewed by followers of the debate as someone who doesn't have to contribute anything meaningful, and even more, as someone we shouldn't listen to. And the reason for that is once again the liberal move to put style over substance. Your opponent's supposed civility over your righteous reaction. When a Palestinian, for example, shares a deeply personal and disturbing story and kindly asks you as citizens to not vote for their torturer, and then a liberal comes along and instead of empathizing, yells at that person, it's somewhat similarly sinister to sea lioning, but it's something different, although equally disturbingly authoritarian, to say the least. Sometimes you can find these last three rhetorical strategies on Twitter, but they are usually found in spaces which allow for slightly longer statements. It's only the provocation part of these strategies which also frequently appears in tweets. All of these latter strategies do not merely fulfill the function of a distraction from your strong arguments and your opponent's weak or absent valid arguments. They not only obscure your systemically privileged opponent's interests of upholding the system they benefit from, as well as responsibilities, interrelations, connections, context, causes, systemicity. Rather, they are able to create brain fog through the sheer dimension of obscurity. They are confusing, overwhelming in sheer number and logical inconsistency. You sense that something's deeply wrong here, that you have to cut through the fog of an excessive number of fake arguments, but it's emotionally and cognitively too much for our brains. Considering what I explained in the first part, you can also view the artificial self-repositioning and self-relabeling of liberals as lefties as a kind of smokescreen which people usually do not see through. Lighter and more detectable forms of smokescreens are created when people hide behind framings like complicity or both sides, or simply behind "it's not possible to vote third party." A particularly evil form of obfuscation is what Harris has done now more than once, creating a false connection or association between genocide and cheap grocery prices, suggesting that you should accept that mass murdering the authorit is necessary for your own well-being. A centuries-old colonial fascist pattern and thought most infamously used by Nazi Germany. We cannot feed them all. Not under our necroliberal system, which due to competition needs to produce waste in abundance, that the rhetorically obscured reality, our system indeed needs mass death and destruction for creating growth. It is inherently greedy and hence inherently genocidal. Sustainable systems and cultures have never needed to expel and mass murder people for getting access to ever more resource and profit maximization. In other words, what Harris has done here is renormalizing the fascist core idea of the supposedly natural, inevitable, and existential need to regularly genocide people, just because she wants to obscure that there are better systems. All these strategies are applied by liberals with the effect of rationalizing their own fascism and evilness. Rationalizing is a centuries-old core strategy of colonial fascism to justify the most atrocious crimes for a fictitious greater good, and in reality incomprehensible creation which puts system over people, a hegemonically homogenized mass over actual individual lives. It uses statisticality to legitimize the so-called sacrifice of the othered lives. System above all, and maybe already tomorrow above your life too. Only if you rationally believe the cause Democrats to be the solution to our escalating neoliberal fascism, you can once again vote for them. If you, however, think rationally and empathetically, you cannot.